guess, have a kind of overview or understanding of what the controversy is about. I have some materials online here. There's a folder somewhere here, Confederate flag debate folder that contains this handout, contains a couple of really interesting videos, most of them brief, sort of talking about the pro and the con positions of this debate. I want you to think about this. Again, this is one example we can use history to maybe understand current debates. I think it can help us also understand and apply both imagined community and tipping points. Both imagined community and tipping points. So we can start this discussion now. We can maybe finish it up down the road. What I want to do first of all is to outline the debate. There are various strong arguments made for and against the use of the Confederate flag. Now, let me quickly give you some background. Basically, the debate is a complicated one. So we need to try to simplify it a bit to sort of have this discussion. But some folks, the Confederate flag still flies in many places. You might see it on the car or house or whatever. Maybe some your families have it, whatever. Much of the debate originated around should the flag be allowed to fly on state buildings. South Carolina, for example, has had it for a long time, so this has recently come up, particularly after the shootings in Charleston at the church over a year ago now. It's actually a part of the state flag in certain states, so like for Georgia, for example, for a long time has had this debate. Some people say, look, you shouldn't allow it on state buildings. Maybe you can do what you want in your own home, right? American ideals say private property, do what you want. But why should it be allowed to fly on state buildings? Some say definitely take it down. It's offensive for various reasons. It shouldn't be on a state building. This is the flag of a nation that fought against the U.S., basically. So there's political arguments that are made, especially around this notion of it flying on state buildings. Some people have some issue, some problem with it. Those that are in favor of it say, you know what? This is America. All right, freedom of speech. Our freedom of speech is one of our central rights. First Amendment. If you take away that or challenge that, it really undermines the entire American process. Living in a democracy is sometimes difficult. Freedom of speech may include even when you don't like what somebody is saying. So there are really strong arguments for and against. I want to begin to kind of outline this in the time we have and think about it. I want you to think about how this makes some sense in terms of imagined community, right? Confederacy and the Union were really two separate imagined communities. Some say to this day the flag has certain meanings, especially for Southerners, in terms of imagined community. Yet it also has reached a tipping point in some important ways in more recent times. What's interesting is, the time period we just got done speaking about saw the end of the Confederacy, right? It ends with the Civil War. Confederacy loses, right? You really didn't see the flag that much for the next 3-4 decades. And so this is why I apply the concept of tipping point to this discussion. When did we start seeing the flag again, I think is significant. One, we saw it in 1948. Right after World War II, the Democratic Party would attempt to reach the White House, and one section of the Democratic Party kind of comes out as overtly racist, essentially, in favor of white supremacy. Strom Thurmond and others come out and say this is the party of the white man, blah, blah, blah. And they leave the Democratic Party. They form what they call the Dixiecrats, and the Confederate flag would be their symbol. So again, this is not 1865 we're talking about anymore. This is 1948. That happens. Then again, especially around South Carolina in the 1960s, you saw the flag become an emblem or a symbol of something. Think about what's happening in this country in the 1960s. I think it's an important tipping point, right? It becomes this kind of symbol of resistance, especially resistance against the civil rights movement. So again, it's not about 1865 at this point. It's about the 1960s, it's about 1948, and about today. Flags are symbols and meanings, and we'll talk more about that on Friday. So it's interesting to think about them in that sense. But again, outlining the arguments. The pro-Confederate flag argument. Supporters take the position there is nothing wrong with displaying the flag in public places or on government buildings. Their arguments include the Confederate flag is merely a symbol. We'll talk about this next time. It has no intrinsic meaning. We invest it with meaning. Like all flags have meanings, right? They're about symbolizing a nation. That's why Anderson is really interested in flags, right? They symbolize a nation. The Confederate flag reflects Southern heritage and tradition, right? This idea of diversity and regional pride. Southerners have always felt maybe a little bit oppressed by the North, going back at least to the Civil War and Reconstruction. Right? And they continue to this day. Some folks feel like the North kind of looks down on the South, this and that. It's a way to memorialize those who died in the Civil War on the Confederate side. Decided that, well, we shouldn't abandon them just because it was the lost cause, especially if you had relatives that fought on that side, you want to memorialize them. Celebration of nonconformity and rebelliousness. Right? It is a symbol of that for many folks. It doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. It may mean something different generationally, you could argue. States' rights. Right? It may symbolize states' rights, not necessarily racism, but states' rights, many say, versus kind of federal power, federal authority. There's a major debate about this in U.S. history and today, right? Many people think that the government is too powerful. And so there's the states' rights argument that was one of the things at the center of the Civil War itself, right? And this constitutional debate. People burn the flag, that's free speech. Can't you have a Confederate flag? Just because some consider it offensive or racist or what have you. Those are some of the pro-arguments. Some of the anti-arguments, anti-Confederate flag arguments, basically reasons why you should not be allowed to fly it, especially on public places, they would say. The Confederate flag is not merely a valueless symbol, right? It was the symbol of a nation that committed treason against the U.S. So a number of veterans groups are like, oh, heck no. How are you going to do this, especially on a government building? You shouldn't be allowed to do that, right? You know, strong argument. Right? Therefore, venerating the Confederate flag constitutes a lack of patriotism, you might say, a celebration of treason, and disrespects those Union soldiers who died. One of the major arguments, Confederate flag conjures up a legacy of racism or white supremacy. Many Confederate leaders were overt or clear in saying they were fighting to defend slavery. They were fighting to defend white supremacy and superiority and all that kind of stuff. There are a lot of folks you can read where they say exactly that. But it didn't necessarily mean that for everybody. I think I gave you the statistic before that 75% of white Southerners, when the Civil War begins, do not own slaves. So some say, well, for them it wasn't just about racism or slavery, it was about other things, perhaps. So it complicates it. Federal authority versus nationalism, we mentioned that before, I think. The constitutional debate. The free speech argument is insufficient, some say. Yes, we have free speech, but there have always been limits on free speech. Right? I always bring up the legal example, the classic, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Right? You go to a movie theater and yell fire, and people get trampled and die, you can be charged. Right? You say, oh, I was just exercising free speech. Yes, but you were also inciting a riot, causing public safety hazard. So we've always had certain limits on and debated this issue of free speech. So some say that's not enough. You go to the airport, and I always use an example too, probably not a good example to use, but I'll use it one more time this year. You go to the airport and see your friend Jack way across the plane, right? You're like, hi, Jack. You keep yelling, he don't hear you. Hi, Jack. What's going to happen to you? You're going to get tackled, right? I was just speaking free speech with my friend Jack. Yeah, we'll talk all about it. Right? So you get you off the plane, get these cuffs on you, and kind of figure it out, right? You can't just say what you want to say at all times, some would say. The tipping point argument of that, it has so much to do, especially with this idea of a defense against the civil rights movement, feminism, these other attacks on tradition that some might see. Right? Its adoption by a white supremacist organization, the Klan. Aryan groups have adopted this symbol. I'll get to the related aspects of the debate, I think, next time. I want you to start thinking about this and processing this. How do we deal with, how do we try to answer difficult questions, debatable questions, questions that might have merit on both sides, and can we use history to do so? What I want you to do is, there are a series of review questions at the end of chapter 15 in the textbook. There are actually 9 of them. What I want to do is have you answer those review questions, depending on your group. If you are in group 1 or 2, if you're an odd number group, I want you to do the odd number questions. If you're in an even number group, I want you to do the even questions. So pay attention to what group you're in. If you don't remember, I'll let you know. I'm going to put a Dropbox up. It's on page 581, I think. I don't remember. My memory's not that great. No, 5. It's in the end of chapter 15. No, here it is, 590. The review questions are in the Give Me Liberty book. 590. I'd like you to answer either the odd or the even number questions. They'll put a Dropbox up for those questions afterwards. And think about this issue of the Confederate flag that we can discuss on Friday. That make sense?
Yeah. Do you expect us to bring both books to each class?
No, I'll try to tell you when we'll need them. We'll probably need this one more often. I'm going to have you guys do individual stuff with that. But this one probably won't need most days. But I'll try to let you know if we will need it in class ahead of time.
Wait, where's the group sheet?
Did you guys give me back that group sheet? I think you did. You remember you forgot already?
Yeah.
Let me turn this off.
Okay, so
I'll try to scan it if I can and post it.